The first thing I heard when I walked into my childhood home was my brother's voice saying, "Now that I'm running the company, we'll need to restructure everything from the ground up." I stopped mid-step in the doorway, my hand still on the knob. The dining table was covered in folders. My folders. Legal documents with my company's logo printed across the top in the blue and silver colors I'd chosen myself. My mother nodded like this was perfectly normal. My aunt smiled and sipped her tea from the china cups reserved for special occasions. No one even glanced at me standing there in the doorway. I scanned the top page from where I stood, squinting to read the header. My name wasn't anywhere on it. My stomach dropped so hard I thought I might pass out again, just like I had 2 weeks ago when this nightmare started. Andrew kept talking about quarterly projections and board meetings and strategic initiatives as if he'd built the company himself. As if I didn't exist at all. My name is Bianca Hale. I'm 42 years old and I built that company from absolutely nothing. Not with family money or connections or favors from rich relatives who opened doors for me. I built it with crushing debt, endless exhaustion, and years of betting everything I had on myself when nobody else would take that risk. The man standing at the head of that dining table, my younger brother Andrew, had nothing to do with any of it. He'd never worked a single day at Hale Innovations. He didn't know our clients' names, didn't understand our products or services, couldn't tell you what our mission statement was if his life depended on it. He'd never attended a board meeting or client presentation. But somehow, while I was lying in a hospital bed fighting pneumonia and sepsis and struggling to breathe, he'd convinced everyone in my family that he should be the one in charge now, that he was the natural successor. That I was too weak to continue. I had returned to my parents' home in the suburbs to recover because the doctor said I needed complete rest and constant supervision for at least 2 weeks. I was weak, heavily medicated, barely able to stand for more than 10 minutes without getting dizzy and having to sit down. I thought I was safe there with family while I regained my strength. I thought they'd take care of me, bring me soup, let me sleep and heal. I was completely wrong about that assumption. This didn't start today, I realized as I stared at those folders covering the table. This had been planned carefully over days, maybe weeks. The documents were too organized, too professionally formatted, too official-looking to have been thrown together quickly. Andrew had been working on this takeover while I was fighting for my life in the intensive care unit. While nurses were checking my oxygen levels every hour and pumping powerful antibiotics into my veins through and for, my own brother was systematically stealing my company. I thought about all those nights I'd slept in my office during the early years, too exhausted to drive home after 18-hour workdays. The enormous risks I'd taken, the investors I'd convinced with nothing but passion and a business plan, the crushing loneliness of building something when everyone said I'd fail spectacularly. I remembered the landlord who wouldn't rent office space to me because I was a single woman with no business experience and no male co-signer. I remembered the bank officer who actually laughed at my loan application before sliding it back across his desk. I remembered the first client who took a chance on me, and how I'd worked 70-hour weeks for months to prove I deserved their trust. Andrew was never there for any of it. He'd been too busy traveling through Europe, finding himself in Asia, trying different careers that never lasted more than 6 months before he got bored. But now that there was real power and serious money involved, suddenly he'd appeared like magic. Suddenly he was interested in the family business. The illness had come out of nowhere like a truck hitting me. One day I was completely fine, giving a presentation to potential investors from California. The next day I couldn't get out of bed, my whole body aching. By the third day, I was in the emergency room with a fever of 104 degrees and struggling to breathe properly. Pneumonia, they said after the chest x-rays. Then sepsis when the infection spread to my bloodstream and my organs started shutting down. I spent 11 days in the hospital, most of them in the intensive care unit hooked up to machines. But even from that hospital bed, even with an 4 drip in my arm and oxygen tubes in my nose and monitors beeping constantly, I was still answering emails when I could focus my eyes. Still signing contracts on my tablet when my hands stopped shaking long enough. Being sick didn't make me incapable of running my company, but apparently, it made me convenient to remove. It gave Andrew the opportunity he'd been waiting for. Andrew finally noticed me standing in the doorway, frozen in shock. "Bianca, you're awake. Good, you needed the rest. You look much better today." He smiled like everything was perfectly fine and normal. "I was just updating Mom and Aunt Patricia about how I've stepped in to help run things while you recover from your illness. You know, for your own good. Someone had to keep the ship steady." He said it like he'd done me an enormous favor, like I should be grateful he'd swooped in to rescue my failing business from disaster. But my business wasn't failing at all. We just landed our biggest contract ever the week before I got sick, a 3-year deal worth $2.4 million. Our revenue was up 37% from last year. I'd been planning to hire 5 new employees and expand into a larger office space. The company was thriving better than ever, which was probably exactly why Andrew had decided now was the perfect time to take it from me. I looked directly at my mother, waiting for her to say something to defend me, to point out how completely insane this entire situation was. She'd been there when I started the company 7 years ago in a tiny rented office. She'd helped me paint the walls myself to save money. She'd celebrated every milestone with me, every new client, every successful year. But she just sat there at the table, hands folded neatly, avoiding my eyes like I was a stranger. "Andrew's been working so hard these past 2 weeks," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You should see all the hours he's been putting in, staying up late, learning the business. He's really dedicated himself." That hurt worse than Andrew's betrayal, worse than the physical pain of my illness. My own mother was acting like he deserved credit and praise for stealing from me. I felt my throat tighten with tears, but I absolutely refused to cry in front of them. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. I forced myself to listen carefully to what Andrew was saying, pushing past my anger and shock. I noticed something important that everyone else seemed to have missed completely. He kept using the word interim when he talked about his role. Interim leadership. Interim decisions. Interim authority while Bianca recovers. There was no paperwork anywhere on that table naming him permanent CEO. No signature from me transferring power officially. No board resolution making it legal and binding. He was standing on air, using fancy corporate words and false confidence, to make everyone believe he had authority he didn't actually possess yet. My foggy, medicated brain started to clear like sun burning through clouds. If he had to keep emphasizing interim, it meant he didn't have real control yet, which meant I still had time to stop this. I still had time to fight back and reclaim what was mine. I just needed to be smart about it. I realized something else important that afternoon as I watched them talk. Every time I showed emotion, anger, tears, frustration, disbelief, someone wrote it down in their mental notebook as proof I was too unstable to run a company. "She's so emotional," they'd whisper to each other when I left the room. "Still not well," they'd say with fake concerned faces. Maybe Andrew's right that she needs more time. So I made a decision right then. I stopped reacting to anything. I made my face blank and calm like a mask. I listened to their conversations without arguing back. I nodded sometimes like I was too tired and medicated to care about any of it. Let them think I was weak and defeated and broken. Let them think the medication made me foggy and compliant and easy to control. Meanwhile, I was watching everything carefully, remembering every word, every document, every lie, planning my next move in silence. Quiet became my strategy. Silence became my most powerful weapon. Over the next few days, I watched Andrew try to play executive from my parents' living room. He used business terms he clearly didn't understand, talking confidently about synergistic paradigms, and leveraging our core competencies, and drilling down into the granular details. The staff members who called with questions sounded confused and frustrated on the phone. I heard him tell our biggest client that we'd be pivoting our strategy moving forward, which nearly gave me a heart attack because that client specifically hired us for our consistent, reliable approach. The company's bank balance wobbled dangerously as Andrew approved expenses without understanding our careful cash flow patterns. He bought himself a new laptop and office furniture without checking if we had budget for it. Power wasn't just revealing his ignorance. It was broadcasting it loudly to everyone who actually knew how the business worked. And I was taking notes on everything. On day 5 of my so-called recovery at my parents' house, I received a forwarded email from Diane, my executive assistant of 6 years. She didn't write anything in the forwarding message, just sent me what Andrew had written to one of our major clients. In the email, Andrew claimed he had full executive authority as the new CEO and would be renegotiating all existing contracts to better reflect current market conditions. He signed it Andrew Hale, CEO, Hale Innovations. My hands shook as I read it, but not from illness this time, from pure rage. He was claiming authority he didn't legally have. He was making promises to clients he couldn't keep. He was putting the entire company at serious risk. I saved that email in 3 different places. My laptop, my phone, and the cloud. Then I started carefully looking through other messages Diane had been quietly forwarding to me over the past several days. There were dozens of them. My health improved faster than anyone expected, even the doctors. They said I was healing remarkably well, that my body was responding perfectly to the treatment. My fever was completely gone. My lungs were clear when they listened with the stethoscope. The exhaustion started lifting day by day like fog burning off. I stopped needing afternoon naps that lasted 3 hours. My hands were steady again when I held things. My mind was sharp and focused instead of foggy. I could stand at my laptop for hours without getting dizzy or having to sit down. I started needing answers instead of rest. I needed to know exactly what Andrew had done in my absence, what authority he'd claimed, what promises he'd made to clients, what damage he'd caused to relationships I'd spent years building. And I knew exactly who to ask. The 5 board members who'd helped me build this company from nothing and who'd been copied on every single email Andrew had sent for the past 2 weeks. I composed a careful email to the 5 board members late one night. I didn't accuse anyone of anything. I didn't sound emotional or angry or upset. I kept it simple and completely professional. I've recovered from my illness and would like to schedule a meeting to clarify current leadership authority and review any decisions made during my medical absence. Please let me know your availability this week. Thank you. That was it. No accusations. No drama. No emotional language. Just a reasonable request from the founder and CEO of the company. I sent it at 9 in the morning when I knew they'd all be checking email. By noon, all 5 board members had responded confirming they could meet Friday afternoon at 2 o'clock. I noticed something very interesting. Andrew wasn't copied on any of their responses. Nobody had thought to include him in the conversation about leadership. That told me everything I needed to know about where they actually stood. Friday came after the longest week of my life. I sat across the conference table from 5 people who had helped me build Hale Innovations from nothing but an idea into a multi-million-dollar business. Vincent had been my first investor when nobody else would take the risk on an unknown woman. Paula had introduced me to half my client base through her connections. Howard had helped me navigate complicated legal problems in year 2 when we almost got sued. Sheila had joined the board when we expanded into manufacturing and needed industry expertise. Thomas had guided our financial strategy through 3 difficult quarters when we almost went under. I brought printed documents in a neat folder. Original incorporation papers with my signature. Board resolutions naming me CEO. Operating agreements. Company bylaws. Everything official and boring and absolutely lethal to Andrew's claims. The truth didn't need to be dramatic or emotional. It just needed to be documented properly and presented clearly. Andrew arrived 20 minutes late to the meeting, looking relaxed and confident like he owned the world. He smiled at everyone around the table and apologized casually for running behind on CEO duties this morning. He sat down in the chair at the head of the table like he owned the room. He started talking about his vision for the company's future direction, before anyone even asked him to speak. I watched him carefully from across the table. He genuinely believed the room was on his side. He thought these 5 people saw him as the natural leader now that I'd been sick. He thought my illness had created a permanent opportunity for him to step in. He had absolutely no idea that every single person at this table knew exactly who had built this company from nothing. He didn't know about the email I'd sent them 3 days ago. He didn't know I'd been forwarding them evidence of his overreach and false claims for the past week. He walked into that meeting blind. Vincent, who'd been my very first investor 7 years ago, asked Andrew a simple, straightforward question. Can you explain the current status of the Thornhill contract and where we stand with the renewal? Andrew's confident smile faltered slightly. Thornhill was our biggest client, worth 40% of our annual revenue. The Thornhill contract is. It's very solid. Very solid. We have a great relationship with them. I've been in contact. Vincent waited patiently. I mean specifically, what are the exact terms of the renewal clause, and when does it trigger? Andrew shuffled through papers he'd brought in a briefcase. I'd have to check the exact details in the files, but I know it's all handled properly. Paula leaned forward across the table. It triggers in 2 weeks. Did you know that? Did you know we need to confirm renewal by next Friday? Silence spread across the room like spilled water. Andrew's face went bright red. I've been focused on bigger picture strategy, he said defensively. The cracks in Andrew's confident mask started showing clearly now. He stumbled through answers to basic questions. He deflected when he didn't know something. When Thomas asked about our current cash reserves and operating expenses, Andrew blamed my illness for not having the numbers. Bianca's been too sick to brief me properly on the financial details. I've been managing a crisis situation without proper information. Sheila's expression hardened like stone. Bianca provided detailed financial reports to this board every single month for 7 years. Are you saying you've been acting as CEO without reviewing those reports? Andrew's voice got defensive and higher-pitched. I've been managing a crisis situation. My sister collapsed and was in intensive care. Someone had to step in immediately to keep things running. But the sympathy in the room was evaporating quickly. They were starting to see clearly what I'd seen from the beginning, that Andrew had seized an opportunity for himself, not filled a genuine need for the company. At the end of the 2-hour meeting, Howard said carefully that the board would need time to review the situation thoroughly before making any formal decisions about leadership. People gathered their papers and briefcases and left the conference room quietly. Andrew looked satisfied as he walked out, practically strutting. My mother, who'd been waiting outside in the lobby, hugged him tightly and said she was proud of how professionally he'd handled the difficult meeting. My aunt told him he was doing a wonderful job under pressure. Everyone seemed to think I'd lost. That the board's delay meant they were leaning toward keeping Andrew in charge permanently. Let them all think that. I knew something they didn't know. I'd spent an hour on the phone with Vincent the night before the meeting, walking him through every single email, every unauthorized decision, every false claim of authority Andrew had made. Vincent had been quietly talking to the other board members all week. Andrew's confidence turned into recklessness and overreach. 3 days after the board meeting, he sent an email to all company staff members declaring himself sole executive authority at Hale Innovations. He announced he'd be restructuring departments immediately and that everyone should report directly to him from now on instead of their current managers. He didn't consult the board first. He didn't ask for approval or permission. He just decided his interim position had become permanent because nobody had officially stopped him yet. It was exactly the overreach I'd been waiting for, the mistake I knew he'd make. He just sealed his own fate with his impatience and massive ego. I forwarded his email to all 5 board members with absolutely no commentary attached. No explanation needed. No emotional language added. The facts didn't need my interpretation. They spoke for themselves clearly and loudly enough. Andrew had just handed me the evidence I needed. The response from the board members was swift and decisive. Vincent called me within an hour of receiving my forwarded email. We're convening an emergency session tomorrow morning at 9. This has gone too far. We should have stopped it sooner. Paula sent a long message saying, we should have stepped in immediately when you first got sick. I'm sorry we let it get this far. We all failed you. Thomas forwarded me the company's detailed financial records showing Andrew had approved $18,000 in unauthorized expenses that weren't in our carefully planned budget, including a new executive office furniture set for himself and a company credit card he'd issued in his own name. Sheila sent me the company bylaws document with several sections highlighted in yellow, the ones explaining clearly that only the board could remove or replace the CEO, and only with documented cause and a formal majority vote. Andrew had authority to do exactly nothing without my written approval or an official board resolution. The board reconvened Tuesday morning in an emergency session at 9 o'clock sharp. Andrew wasn't invited to attend. He still didn't know the meeting was even happening. I arrived early with my attorney Bernard, who brought copies of every relevant document proving my continuous authority as CEO and founder. Vincent opened the meeting by reading Andrew's sole executive authority email out loud to everyone. Then he read the specific section of our company bylaws explaining that no such authority existed or could be claimed without a formal board vote. Paula presented evidence of confused clients and frustrated staff members who didn't know who was actually in charge anymore. Thomas showed the unauthorized expenses in detail, line by line. My attorney presented the original incorporation documents and board resolutions. The vote took exactly 4 minutes. 5 board members voted unanimously to formally reaffirm my position as sole CEO with full executive authority. 0 votes for Andrew. The meeting was over by 9:30. The board secretary sent the official notification letter to Andrew at 2:30 that afternoon by email and certified mail. I wasn't there when he received it, but Diane told me later that he'd gone completely pale reading the email at his desk. The letter was formal and brutally clear. The board of directors of Hale Innovations formally recognizes Bianca Hale as the sole CEO and executive authority of the company. Any communications from Andrew Hale claiming leadership authority are unauthorized and should be disregarded immediately. All staff members should resume their normal reporting structure under Ms. Hale's leadership effective immediately. Mr. Hale's interim assistance during Ms. Hale's illness is appreciated, but his role is now concluded. He is welcome to submit a formal employment application if he wishes to work at the company in an official capacity in the future. That last line was Vincent's idea. Professional. Polite. Absolutely devastating to Andrew's ego. That Sunday, there was another family dinner at my parents' house. Same dining table where this nightmare had all started exactly 3 weeks earlier. But there was no paperwork spread across the surface this time. No folders. No documents. No talk of restructuring or strategy. Andrew sat at the far end of the table, barely touching his food, staring at his plate. He didn't make eye contact with anyone. Nobody asked him about the company. Nobody congratulated him on anything. My mother tried desperately to make conversation about the weather and her garden. My aunt suddenly remembered she needed to leave early. For another commitment. The people who'd supported Andrew's takeover attempt were now pretending they'd never been involved at all. Nobody defended him. Nobody made excuses for what he'd done. The silence was thick and uncomfortable, filling the room like smoke. I ate my dinner calmly, finished my water and stood up. I need to get going. I have an early meeting tomorrow morning. I didn't raise my voice or make a scene. I just left. I packed my remaining things from my parents' house that evening in silence. My medication bottles from the bathroom. The books I'd been reading during recovery. The laptop I'd been using to quietly gather evidence against Andrew. I didn't need a big closure conversation with anyone. I didn't need to hear apologies that weren't coming anyway. I didn't need to explain to my mother why her support of Andrew had hurt me so deeply and broken my trust. I didn't owe anyone relief from their guilt or discomfort about what they'd done. Some people spend years trying to get family members to understand why their betrayal was wrong. I decided I didn't need that understanding anymore. Their opinion of me didn't change the truth of what happened. I loaded my car carefully and drove back to my own apartment across town. Freedom felt strange after weeks of being watched and managed and controlled, but it felt absolutely right. Monday morning, I walked back into my company's building with my head high. My office was exactly as I'd left it before getting sick. Diane had made sure nothing was moved or changed or touched. The staff members looked genuinely relieved to see me back. 3 people stopped by my office before lunch to say they were glad I was back in charge. Our biggest client called to confirm I was resuming my role, and I could hear the relief in his voice. The Thornhill contract renewal went through without any issues. The unauthorized expenses Andrew approved were reviewed and some were reversed. Everything returned to normal within a week, like Andrew's takeover attempt had been nothing but a strange fever dream. He never contacted me again. He never apologized for what he'd done. And that's when I finally understood something important about power and family and business. Power doesn't need permission from people who don't respect you. It just needs documentation, patience, and the quiet certainty that truth wins eventually.